Good evening. It is 5:32 on Tuesday, January 17th, 2023, and this regular meeting of the Sandpoint Planning and Zoning Commission is now called to order in council chambers at City Hall, 1123 West Lake Street, Sandpoint, Idaho. For the record, I am Chairman John Hastings presiding. Also present are Commissioners Mose Dunkel, Slate Camp, and Amelia Boyd. We will now recite the Pledge of Allegiance. If anyone will please stand.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. I would like to make one quick announcement, and that is there are listening devices available. If there is anybody here who in attendance who would benefit from those, let one of the staff know. Are there any other general announcements from commissioners or city staff?
Mr. Chairman, just a reminder that the Housing and Neighborhood Survey
Yes.
is active, and that will go through January 25th.
Thank you. I know I have already participated, and I hope a bunch of others will too. Okay. Next on the agenda is approval of the meeting minutes, and I will first entertain a motion to approve the minutes from December 6th, 2022 meeting.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Motion passes. The next item on the agenda this evening is a public hearing on a request to rezone property at 1805, 1815, and 1915 North Boyer Avenue, and legally described as lots 1 and 2, and the east 25 feet of lots 7 and 8 in block 3 of Culver's Addition, and lots 1 and 2 of Samuelson's Place Plat, section 15, township 57 North, range 2 West. Records of Bonner County, Idaho, from residential single family to mixed use residential. A notice of public hearing was published in the Bonner County Daily Bee in the city's newspaper of record on December 27th, 2022. The order and procedure for both the public hearing this evening will be as follow. Explanation of the subject of the public hearing by city staff. Presentation by the applicant. Please note that commissioners should address their questions to the applicant at this time. Opening of the public hearing, at which time the public may provide testimony. Questions should be asked of those testifying at this time. The order for those providing testimony will be as follows: those in favor first, then those neutral, and then those opposed. And the applicant's rebuttal testimony will follow, at which time final questions may be asked of the applicant. Please note that if new facts are elicited during rebuttal, the public will be given an opportunity to comment on any new facts. And then we will close the public hearing and the commission will deliberate. No new information may be provided after the hearing has been closed, with questions directed only to city staff during the deliberation. Before I proceed any further, I would like to ask for confirmation from each commissioner, please, that you have had no ex parte contact and have no conflict of interest as pertains to this request.
None.
No.
None.
And none from myself either. And I will now yield the floor to City Planner Amy Tweeten for an introduction of this request and explanation of the application.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, this is a public hearing on case PZC 220004. It is a request to rezone 2 parcels totaling 4.67 acres from residential single family to mixed use residential, which is a commercial district. The map to the upper right indicates the current zoning. The 2 single family parcels outlined in red are the subject of the hearing, and the surrounding zoning RM to the north and west, and single family to the south and the east. The existing use of the property is residential, and surrounding uses are residential and institutional, with churches to the north and the south. The property is within the comprehensive plan context area 3B And that is a context area that supports higher density residential and commercial uses. The stated intent for the rezone is to develop the site into multiple family units. The concept shows about 170 units of 2- and 3-story buildings, and then neighborhood commercial along Boyer Avenue at the southeast side of the property. The proposed multifamily development would require a conditional use approval based on the number of units proposed, and that would come back to the Planning and Zoning Commission should the rezoning be approved. Following public testimony and deliberation, the Planning and Zoning Commission may take one of the following actions. One would be to make a recommendation to City Council at its first meeting. Recommendation shall state specifically on what grounds or statute the recommendation is based. Or the commission could choose to postpone consideration of the application to consult with advisors and staff and forward it to council within 40 days of the hearing. Considerations for the rezone. The request again is to rezone to mixed use residential, which is consistent with the current future land use map, but the comprehensive plan land use map goals and objectives are in the process of being updated. The request would allow all uses permitted in the MUR zoning district, not only those ones shown on the conceptual plan. The request includes a development conceptual plan only. A rezoning agreement could be required to increase predictability. The request impact on the delivery of public services by any political subdivision also needs to be taken into consideration with the rezone. The required findings are whether or not the proposed zone change from residential single family to mixed use residential is in conformance with the future land use map and other policies in the comprehensive plan, and whether or not the proposed mixed use residential zone is consistent and compatible with existing zoning and future land uses in the vicinity of the site. Again, these are the parcels proposed for the rezoning request. And that is all I have for presentation.
Commissioners, do you have any questions for staff at this time? I do. If you would go back to a couple of those first slides. Go back to the very first one there initially. Yeah, I think maybe that's just because it's part of the key of the map where it's talking about some of the different airport safety zones. None of that comes into play here, does it? I don't see the lines there. But any part of this in any part of the airport safety zone?
This is outside of any of the airport zones.
It's completely outside.
It is outside.
That's what I thought. Then go on to the next slide. Because I think in the earlier materials that we had, that schematic was not there. At least I didn't see it before. That's the first time I've seen it. So is the only portion of this that is potentially, I know this is just a concept plan, but the only portion of this that potentially is commercial, retail, whatever, on the bottom right-hand corner, yeah, those units right there.
This is what's being shown as potential commercial.
And that's all single story.
Correct.
Gotcha. But it's conceptual, not a firm plan.
Right. It is each of those buildings is, I believe the maximum size is 9,000 square feet, which is a limit of that zoning district.
Gotcha.
Okay, so when you asked if it was a single story or said it was a single story, is it a single story or is it the bottom story, the bottom level?
Again, the concept that I understand is these are single story commercial. Oops, sorry.
Okay,
The residential are 2- and 3-story and the commercial is single story.
Correct.
as presented.
Okay, thanks for the clarification on that. On the one to the north, are those like retention ponds in a park area?
Those are the delineated wetlands.
Any other questions from commissioners?
Yeah, on the next slide, I think it's the next one. No, the next one, there on the bottom, it says. I'll go back, sorry. Public services by any political subdivision.
So that is the state statute with a rezoning you should consider. It's not a finding, but consider delivery of services if it's by the school district or the county or the roads. It's just other political subdivisions that could be impacted by the rezoning of the property.
Okay, thank you.
I think I saw some language in there about impact on schools too. Maybe it was in the code.
We'll get that opportunity, I'm sure.
Okay.
Yeah. Anything else? Well, with that, I will now yield the floor for the applicant's presentation. If you would see here. Share. Perfect. Thank you, Commissioners. Jeremy Grimm, for the record, owner of Whiskey Rock Planning, professional land use planner. And I'm here tonight representing Mr. Pearson and this rezone request. And I'll walk through sort of the highlights of what the request is for and the process we're following here so that we can eventually get this to a point where we do have some solid plans and a vision for what could happen on the property. Please feel free to stop me at any time if there's any questions or if you want to go further on something. So as staff presented, here's the subject parcel right here. Mr. Pearson purchased both these parcels from independent property owners. And we're asking for a rezone from residential single family to mixed use residential. And that falls into the CA3B future land use designation of the city. So first thing I just wanted to touch on is where do we have these CA3B designations in the city? And I think you're all aware, I was planning director when we put together this long range future land use map. And these areas were designated specifically so that they could be sort of on the edges and service residential areas, really trying to prevent people having to jump in their car and drive all the way to Walmart, Ponderay, or downtown or somewhere else to get, basic services or to have a gathering place for their neighborhood, more or less. So they're dispersed throughout town, some on arterials, but these little pockets throughout town that are trying to provide this neighborhood gathering area for where we anticipated growth to be occurring back in 2009. So what is CA3B or mixed use residential? When you look at the zoning, the mixed use residential zoning district provisions represent a commercial zoning classification that permits rather than mandates a vertical mix of low intensity commercial and residential uses within the same buildings. So it allows it, but it doesn't require it. And again, it's this concept of low intensity mixed use where people can live above stores or stores can be on the street adjacent to growing residential areas. So why did we create this zone? Well, there's this concept, if you're getting really into the planning details, this concept of a 15-minute city. And that's the thought that you can provide basic needs, maybe some light shopping, a coffee shop, Kinko's, some low impact retail
within about 15 minutes of someone's house, maybe a little pub or pizzeria or something to that effect, that people can walk to. And what they found is that really does a couple of things, but it really helps bring a neighborhood cohesiveness to an area. So people aren't, again, traveling outside their neighborhood, and maybe you meet some of your neighbors, or you get together with a knitting group or a Bible study or something else to go sit at one of these places that's close to your neighborhood. And the big thing is that these areas aren't designed to induce traffic. Some I'll go through it in a second, but some of the standards in the code, these areas aren't like where there's going to be a major retail center that's going to pull traffic in from elsewhere. The primary focus is to have neighborhood scaled, walkable or bikeable centers near these neighborhoods. So when we look at some of the benefits of this like 15-minute walk or bike ride, it provides socioeconomic equability, for folks without a car maybe, or kids, teenagers, that they can walk someplace and meet up. It reduces traffic congestion. Imagine if in this site we're talking about, there's a little convenience store, a bodega type, where you could get half and half, or eggs or beer or wine or whatever you might need. So now you're not jumping in your car, driving up and down Boyer or something to that effect. It gives people the opportunity to walk to these locations. So it's good for people's health, and it provides, convenient services and access, which are accessible to multimodal transport, saves times, and it can improve quality of life for folks. So you can see that we have these kind of broken up and dispersed throughout the city. And that was part of the comp plan vision, is to provide these edges and nodes for our neighborhoods. So when we look at the MUR zone, it talks about accommodating mixed-use buildings with some of these retail and neighborhood uses. It encourages development that exhibits the physical design characteristics of pedestrian-oriented storefront style shopping and streets. And it promotes the health and well-being of residents by encouraging physical activity, alternative transportation, and greater social interaction. And that's right from Sandpoint Code Title IX. So how does it do it? Well, the first thing is it talks about the setbacks. So there's some restrictions in this zone for that commercial. You really, in this zone, we were trying to get the buildings right on the street. So it feels like there's not a big parking lot in the front. It really meshes well with sort of the fabric of the street. So the entire building face must abut the street property line or be located within 10 feet of the property line. And then there's some restriction on the size, 5,000 square feet for a footprint for new commercial establishments. So we're not going to get big, box stores or anything really bigger than, a modest size home. And then the construction's another part. 9226 talks about these frontages, these front facades having a floor to height of 12 feet. So not little sunken down strip malls, but really, really nice open and prominent facades along the street. So that's all from Title IX as well in that MUR zone. So as you're aware, this is the future land use map, and the CA3B is in blue here. And it's described as development patterns are identical to CA3, which is our mixed use, our multifamily residential, but it envisions mixed use neighborhood compatible retail. They're typified by pedestrian focused activities such as salons, coffee shops, residential scale professional or institutional offices. And, when you think about everything that's occurred in this corridor, pretty much all that blue area is developed or has been developed recently. So this is likely one of the last opportunities in this corridor to really make sure that the vision of that comprehensive plan, what the residents of Sandpoint wanted when they adopted it, actually can possibly be constructed, because this is really one of the last pieces of CA3B that hasn't been developed in this area. So that future land use map and the comp plan talks about these context areas, the CA3B, and that was important, and it's designed specifically to facilitate the development of long-range strategic growth patterns. So it's not a zoning map, it just is telling us, hey, we desire this kind of activity in these locations in the future. And since it was adopted in 2009, it's about an 8 or maybe 10-year plan. That future sort of is now. When you go on further in the comp plan, it talks about the community design, and it speaks to the importance of mixed use options in Sandpoint, including this one. One way in which Sandpoint addresses affordability is by providing mixed use development. And it goes on to say it's recognized by the residents as an important way to foster walkability, make efficient use of infrastructure, improve safety, and add personal convenience. So where I'm going with all this is there's a lot of support and vision in the comp plan that talks about this CA3B designation. Chapter 3 of the comp plan also talks about growth being directed into emerging higher intensity districts, such as the area along North Boyer. Specifically, it says this will take advantage of the population influx to stimulate reinvestment in these areas, creating exciting community centers where people can live, work, shop, meet, and mingle. So when I read the comp plan and look at this language, and having been a part of it, this is exactly the kind of progression that was envisioned as we thought this area was going to start to infill and build up along both sides of North Boyer. So to review, there's limited areas in town to designate as CA3B and mixed use residential. It's important to understand this isn't designed to compete with downtown. That's really important, because downtown is still the core and the anchor of our community. But it does provide that low intensity neighborhood scale services and businesses. As I mentioned, promotes health and walkability, social interactions, transportation choices. And if you think about it, we're going to have a couple hundred new homes in and around this area. And this could create a center where people can meet and say, oh, you live in my neighborhood, other than meeting, when your dog's off the leash or, something's happening on your street. There are some real strict design limits and scale limits on development that occurs here. And this is one of the areas identified as desirable for this type of zoning. When I went back through some of the historical city documents, I know it's not an official adopted plan for the city, but in 2018, the city did conduct I think it was about a $25,000 project to create a community vision for the U of I and the Boyer corridor. Some of you may have been part of it. I think Mose showed up at one of the meetings, I remember. When it said this, the city adopted this is a quote from that visioning plan. When the city adopted its comprehensive plan amendment at the end of 2017, it assigned land use designations expressing the community's priorities for mixed use development along the railroad, Boyer, and Mountain View. So when you start to look a little more closely at that vision from 2018, this is actually figure 2.09 comes from the city's own vision for this area. And you can see here on, which is actually the east side of Boyer, this is looking south, but you can see those facades and buildings kind of built right up or pretty close to the street, really trying to give it that walkable, defined streetscape rather than kind of what we have right now. So there is a lot of historical support for this vision, and it was thought through back in 2018. In that plan, there's some guiding principles, and they were developed with a consultant during a storefront studio conversation and reinforcing policy guidance found in the city's comp plan. This is all from that visioning plan. And it talks about buildings may reach from 2 to 3 stories in height, framing Boyer Avenue, emphasizing its importance as a street, trail, and retail storefront corridor. Located within a walk of downtown. It talks about a new community sub-district with small-scale businesses and offices and a streetscape that is rich with character. So that's sort of what Mr. Pearson, looking at our plans and our adopted master plans, this is sort of where he started to build this vision for developing this property. When we look at, recent area development around here, these are just the ones that are most prominent. We've got probably 320 new families that are going to be living in this area at some point in the next, let's say 5 years, 7 years as this gets built out, but these have all been approved. So, as I was kind of focusing on before, we're missing that commercial element, that CA3B or mixed use residential that was in all the comp plan, which is right here highlighted in green. This is that potential walkable neighborhood commercial strip on the front that would potentially reduce hundreds of trips, again, grabbing half and half beer, milk, wine, soda, whatever. Maybe there's a pizzeria or a taco shop. The future will tell us, but that's sort of how this all comes together and tries to plug this site in. As we zoom in a little bit, we've got almost 5 acres of infill opportunity here. Between the two parcels, you'll notice quite prominently there is a street that runs between them, and I'll touch on that in a minute. But it's a complex project for me and the applicant because you got to go in steps. We'd love to design a full build out right now and show you everything just as we want to build it, but the cost to that, literally hundreds of thousands of dollars of engineering, design, architects. So we're going at this incrementally. The first step is to get it rezoned, then we'll come back and we'll talk about that road with some more defined plans. And then eventually, because it's a required conditional use permit to build more than 7 units, I believe, in the zone, we'll be coming back with a fully developed set of plans with elevations, parking, mixture, everything, and applying for that conditional use permit to this body. So we're going incrementally, step by step, and that's just because of the cost and the abundance of caution. We wouldn't want to spend all that money and come to you with everything and realize that the zone change didn't get approved, then everything else is worthless. So we're proceeding cautiously. But as part of the initial due diligence and understanding, the first thing we had to do is we had to understand, one, are there wetlands and what does that look like? And then the primary reason for this site plan right here, this schematic, this illustration, is just to understand what is the potential capacity of this land. Mr. Pearson is not definitely going to build this. We still have to go through a CUP. We still have to go through an alley or road vacation potentially, but this is just, from an engineering perspective, meeting the code, what could, we do here? Because we needed this number to know what are the trips going to be? How many potential cars are we going to have to be dealing with? What's the circulation pattern going to look like? Are we going to have to do a traffic study? So although in theory, yes, this could be what might be developed there. Our sincere intent of this is just to understand how many potential trips and cars and traffic studies and wetlands and drainage and stormwater and things like that. So to say this is putting the cart before the horse is very true. It's just an illustrative purpose of what could we believe be developed on the site. Boxes are hard to interpret. This is a project that's currently being built just west of the library by Mr. Dom. So this is, if you'd looked at his original site plan, it looked kind of like this. But once you get that assurance that you get the yellow light to go forward, then you start to do sort of the architecture and design and, the elevations with the materials. So, as an example, this is what those boxes could become once we start moving down that path into design a little more clearly. As for the storefront, commercial portion on Boyer. These are just some illustrations from the internet that I found that I thought depicted various types of storefront in a neighborhood commercial setting. So again, they're not big boxes. They're intentionally designed to be neighborhood destinations. If you've traveled in some cities, you might have come upon some of these types of neighborhood commercial areas. So they're small scale. There's a few in Spokane still, but they're just a spot for the neighborhood to gather and get some basic services. When we look at the goals of the comp plan, and it talks about efficient use of land and infill development. It talks about adding diversity to the available housing stock. It talks about opportunity for neighborhood services and gathering places to enrich the character and add more dynamic fabrics to the emerging corridor, and to follow the vision, goals, and policies laid out in the 2018 visioning report of the Boyer corridor. So this is really just the first step. The first step is to rezone this to mixed use residential. If that's successful, then we'll be coming back with a alley or street vacation request, which has its own bunch of hair on it, because we're going to have to look at circulation to come through from Culver's or Boyer and how that's going to work. We'll obviously do a revised site plan because we'll have a little more assurance that we can actually do a conditional use permit for this in the zone. And then we come forward with a conditional use permit eventually. And I know you're familiar, but I'll just reiterate, in those CUPs, there's elevations, there's design, there's materials, there's traffic studies, there's utility, there's stormwater, public hearings. So you'll inevitably, well, one way or the other, you'll see this property before you again. We hope that it's in a way that really epitomizes that vision in the comp plan. Alternatively, though, Mr. Pearson could just go forward with a standard subdivision in the residential single family zone. And what that might look like, I just took some clips of Maplewood, and that I mirrored the one over on Sapphire, just to give you a kind of a perspective of what the density might look like if it's just residential single family. So in this scenario, you could have maybe up to 32 single family units with some ADUs. I think you get about 64 units based on the area. There's a Institute of Transportation Engineers that assigns about 10 trips per day per household. So we're talking about potentially 640 trips a day derived from vehicle trips from these two lots, which again, some of those trips are going to be just going to get a bottle of milk or something down at Super One or whatever. But without that commercial element that's envisioned in the comp plan, this really doesn't meet that vision of the comprehensive plan as single family. There's no neighborhood services, you still have traffic, and it does not provide a real variety of housing choices. So with that, I just want to throw some closing comments before I take your questions. The rezone request is in accord with the comprehensive plan. Community visioning in 2018 identified this corridor as an emerging subdistrict with neighborhood commercial and services. This rezoning will allow for this vision to be realized. Single family zoning will likely allow for 64 units, which without a commercial component would induce vehicle demand along Boyer. Sandpoint has a traffic and park impact fee, which are designed to address the impacts of growth and to increase the capacity of parks and roads. So from the public services, we have that tool in place today. You pay those impact fees. And this is the first step in a very long process. There's going to be a lot more design and study and coordination with staff to inform the future development of the site. So with that, I appreciate your time tonight, and stand for any questions you have.
Questions? Do you have any idea of how the vacation of that potential road alley would change your plans?
Yeah, we've looked at it right now. If under the least efficient outcome, the alley road stays unimproved and we just have two access points, almost like those two driveways right now, and they're developed as two separate parcels. Under the best case scenario, though, that vacation allows, when you vacate that, the land can go half of that road would go to each adjacent property owner. So we could merge these lots and have a larger canvas, so to speak, to work from and lay out a single access point, which would reduce, turning conflict on Boyer and would allow us to have, again, that central entrance for the property. But that's all, again, 2 or 3
Right.
steps that's ahead. This is going to be a bit to swallow.
And I'm curious as well, from your perspective, I know that one of the things it asks for in these neighborhood commercial zones is quite often residential above the commercial. Do you see that as undesirable, that people would not, is that why that's not like incorporated into this? And I haven't seen it incorporated to, other things that have come before us. We don't usually see that combination, although there's some starting, but.
My personal preference is I'd love to see it.
Yeah.
I know there are financing challenges once you get a building like that. It's really the way lending works. It's really simplistic to just loan and borrow on a straight, defined
Straight this or that,
building.
but not the combo.
Well, once you get condos and other factors, it does make it a little more complex. But in speaking with Mr. Pearson, he doesn't have a set, yes or no on that. We were just, again, for the initial capacity and trips and wetlands and stormwater, we said, does this site potentially work and what's the most you could do on there? And it's likely that that's going to go through revisions. He's not opposed to putting residential above commercial at all.
And do you see both the commercial units and the residential as individual ownership or lease rentals?
Yeah, he's expressed that he wants to own the commercial. The multifamily could either be condominiumized or just apartments as well.
Other questions? No. Okey doke. Thank you very much for your presentation. If. Did I do that yet? I don't think so. Great. So if there are no additional questions, then we will, I'm going to recite the public hearing rules and procedures. Please note that as provided in the notice of public hearing and as stated within the meeting packet posted on the city website, all written comments are to be delivered to the city clerk. Those comments that were received by way of that stated procedure were either included in the meeting packet or, if received in time prior to the meeting, were forwarded to the commissioners. This process must be followed to ensure comments are properly included in the permanent hearing record. I would like your attention at this time, please, as I recite the standards for public testimony during this evening's public hearing. Testimony shall directly address the subject at hand. Testimony shall not be personally derogatory towards any individual, organization, or business. Public comment opportunities are for comment only. Do not direct any questions to the commission or to staff. In the interest of time, testimony shall not be repetitious, and each speaker is allotted no more than 3 minutes. If your testimony fails to comply with these standards, it may be declared out of order and you'll be asked to cease. Those here in chambers who wish to speak will need to complete a signed form and hand it to the clerk. Do not approach the dais. The forms are available on the table by the door. Those on Zoom will also have the opportunity. Do we have anybody on Zoom this evening? We do, thank you. Those in attendance are not to disrupt this meeting or the business at hand that is being taken up by the commission. Disruptive behavior, including clapping, disruptive noises, comments, or exclamations from the audience. And we will now prepare to proceed with the public hearing. For those of you participating on Zoom, when your name is called, you will see a prompt on your screen asking whether you would like to unmute, and then you will need to unmute yourself in order to be heard. And the clerk will now lower all hands on Zoom in order to take testimony in the order previously stated. If you wish to speak in favor, are neutral, or in opposition, and I will make a call for each, then you may raise your hand at that time. Just a reminder that in the interest of time, please do not repeat prior comments made by others, but simply state your support for those comments. And each speaker will be allowed up to 3 minutes. And the public hearing is now open. We will begin with those in the room who wish to testify in favor. Madam Clerk, will you please call the first speaker to the podium?
There is no one in the room that would like to speak in favor.
Thank you much. We will now recognize those participating remotely. If you are participating on Zoom and wish to testify in favor of this request, please raise your hand.
There is no one on Zoom indicating they would like to speak in favor.
Thank you. We'll now move on to those who are neutral in this proposal. We will now recognize those in the room who wish to testify as neutral. Madam Clerk, is there anyone here in the chambers who wishes to testify as neutral?
Yes, we've got Becky Meyer.
Thank you.
Hi, Commissioners. I haven't met all of you yet. Some of you I do know quite well. I've worked with you in the past. I wanted to introduce myself and let you know I've been to the Sandpoint City Council several times to speak about developments, and somebody suggested maybe I should come to the Planning and Zoning one step before that. I wanted to introduce myself, tell you that I'm here. I was here for 23 years. I left for 6 and was a superintendent in a different district, and I'm back again. So I have been here since 1993, familiar with everything that was happening in the district before then, and just reacquainting myself. So I am going to be coming as often as I can, and also to the city council and the other city councils as well in the district. I am speaking on behalf of the district, and at this point, the district would like me to make statements in the neutral fashion, not being for or against developments, but we are going to be putting in letters to you with each development, not to be repetitive, but just more of keeping it in the forefront of you as planning and zoning, and with the people in the community, that the school district is not able to charge impact fees. He mentioned this nice gentleman. I'm very happy that you were part of this initial comp plan, and I do love the intentionality of how this was developed. I learned a lot tonight, which I really appreciate all of your insight and being here. So I'm glad I was here. I just want to, and I will again, always repeat to the planning and zoning, every new student that comes, he said that there's possibility of 350 families. Down in Kootenai County, where I just was, 1.5 students are expected from every new house. So if we have multifamily units, there could be a lot of children coming into our community. And we don't have the ability, without going out to the voters, to have bonds and levies that will address this growth. So just wanting all of you to please keep in mind as we move forward, let's work together. I have really become involved with Amy, Jennifer Stapleton, and trying to keep in constant contact with the city, as the other cities as well, to just be able to keep in mind that our children really deserve, all the students in our area deserve to be able to have that voice heard, that it will impact our students. And as we move forward, I'm happy to give you any insight into the comp plan that the district did before I got here. We're in the middle of our 5 years, starting a 5-year strategic plan, which we had community feedback in. We're just finalizing that. That'll be adopted to start in the fall this year. And I just really want to be involved and make sure that I'm speaking up for the voices of the children of the school district as we move forward together. Thank you. If you have any questions, I know I'm not supposed to ask you now, but I can certainly stay after. And thank you for the time. I appreciate being back again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Is there anyone on Zoom who wishes to testify as neutral?
No, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Finally, then we'll hear from those who are opposed to this request. We will now recognize those in the room who wish to testify in opposition. Madam Clerk, is there anyone here in the chambers wishing to testify as opposed?
No, Mr. Chairman.
For those participating on Zoom, if you wish to testify as opposed, please raise your hand now. No, thank you. If there anyone else on Zoom or in the room who wishes to speak in opposition, one last chance. Okay. Is there anyone who would like to speak? Oh, go ahead. Okay. Is there anyone who would like to speak and has not had an opportunity to do so? Keeping things wide open. Do commissioners have any other questions at this time?
I do, Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
This is for Amy. So if I were to read the packet correctly and the future land use map that's being worked on for the comp plan, updated comp plan. So is this CA 3B going to be the new neighborhood mixed use designation?
It most likely will be.
Okay. That was my question.
The current one will most likely be the new one. Is that what I heard?
Well, because we're moving away from the context areas, but and that's to be discussed after if those are the land use categories we're moving forward with. But there is a proposed land use category called neighborhood mixed use, which would be similar to the mixed use residential is the zoning category, but it would be similar to the CA
3B.
3B. Okay. Thank you.
And Amy, do you know, did any of those other identified areas of CA 3B really come to fruition where we had any kind of, I'm trying to think of what was already here and what may have been developed since that time. Did any of that kind of meet those goals?
That was my question too.
Yeah.
Nothing that's built.
I can't see.
Well, I'm almost, some of them were like almost pre-existing, were they or not, in terms of
Right, it was
like where Winter Ridge is and things like that, but.
So behind Super One. That recent one, supposedly that'll have a very small element of commercial
I
on it.
don't have the full. Did you, Jeremy, why don't you share you had the full city. at one of the hearings.
I was just curious. That's nothing that really pertains, so we don't need to spend too much time on it.
I think a lot of the areas did have some existing
Right.
commercial areas.
Elements
that
of
were
that,
then
yeah.
Supported by that land use category.
Okay.
I have a question for legal.
Yep.
So I've lived in different states and I know that developments, I don't know, I don't know if it was, what the law was, but I just know that certain developments were required to give money to the school district for impact fees. Is that not legal in Idaho? Is that not something that the city can require, or what is the?
The city can't require that. There are certain types of political subdivisions that can require impact fees, and school districts just aren't listed in the statute. So it would take a legislative amendment from the state legislature in order for the city for that to even be a possibility.
Gotcha. Could there be an incentive? Could that be something incentivized or?
So the short answer is that's flirting with trouble,
Right.
because it really distinguishes between a fee and a tax, and at some point
Okay.
you're starting to initiate an illegal tax, and it's very clearly not allowed for school districts to.
So it could be a
initiate
gift.
impact fees. The developers certainly are encouraged, and some do donate to the school district, but the city just can't require it.
Okay. Because that's my concern with all these developments that are going up on North Warrior, and I can appreciate Superintendent Meyer that is a concern in the future 5-10 years down the road, you're gonna have, because those are it's young families that live in those developments. And I can just see that impact of more students having to hire more teachers, having to have more classrooms, so that, I know there's room in I mean, you could put a modular anywhere on a field, but then that just takes away from play area and all that from the school. So I appreciate the comments, because I know it is something in the future that will be impacted greatly. And our kids need to be thought of.
Yeah, I think it's a really good point. And how do you change it through legislation?
Quite clearly, it would take an act of the state legislature, and they would just need to include, I mean, all the impact fee legislation is quite comprehensive. And many political subdivisions are included in it, but the school districts aren't. So they would just need to just tack that.
That's a shame. That's a shame they're not.
Yeah.
Make something happen.
So the question on where are the mixed use residential areas currently, it's along Division. As Jeremy pointed out, the area on North Boyer really has not come to fruition. That was the interest. There was no commercial put in University Place. There is mixed use residential up north of Woodland. Those
Right.
parcels are current, one of them has partially a residential subdivision preliminary platted on it. So I think primarily it was put in where there was existing smaller scale commercial uses.
That one is going in though, that city council approved that came to us. I forget the name. Oh, gosh. It's right there behind Super One or that lot.
Your
That's gonna
the
go in.
conditional use permit.
Yes, yes,
The commission, and that is a mixed use building.
right.
And that is on the Boyer corridor in
Boyer.
this section here.
Yeah, it was one with the first floor being
Yes,
retail.
yes.
But not in one of these areas.
Mhm.
So,
Okay,
so to be clear, if let's say this is approved, the zoning for this or these two parcels ends up being mixed use forever or until there's some sort of change.
Correct. If you rezone the property from single family to mixed use residential. Unless someone comes forward to rezone it again, that will be the zoning designation. And at this point, any of the permitted uses in that district would be allowed.
and single family is one of those allowed,
Right.
Mhm.
so it could, I mean, yeah.
And more of a commercial presence also is allowed. Like
Yes.
almost entirely commercial.
It's a
Or,
it's considered a commercial district, but it does allow a lot of residential, and it does quite dramatically restrict the character of commercial development.
do we have that definition
Didn't
available?
it? I think it specifically says square footage. Yeah, right here.
Right, that's.
Yeah.
Um.
And
and
let me
that's why-
just, let me just ask here too, maybe more of this can come up in our deliberations if we want to actually bring the public hearing to a close.
Oh, yeah.
And did you hear any kind of testimonies that you would like any kind of rebuttal statements to?
Yeah, I'll just provide a brief rebuttal. It has to do, I really appreciate Dr. Meyer being out here. I have a couple children in the school district, and I work for a national impact fee consulting group for over a year all over the country. I've done school impact fees. They're critically important. I did one in South Carolina. It was $24,000 per house, because that was the true impact to build an equivalent space for a new student in their school district with the buses and everything else. So they're critically important. I advocate for them. They've been tried in the state of Idaho and it was rejected. I sit on the Idaho Economic Advisory Council. I speak to the governor several times a year about this issue, and it's really important. And I hope that they change the code, Sage or someone sponsors legislation to do that. There's a lot of people working on it, but it's really, really important. Other than that, you know, the goal of that mixed use residential was to see some, you know, infill. We had some on the new daycare by Cofelt Funeral Home. Infilled a little bit there, but no, it hasn't taken off. You know, we just need that demand for it. So I think in this site, with all those new homes going up around this corridor, this may be a spot where we could get it to happen. But thanks for your time. Appreciate your thoughts and consideration.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And based upon the applicant's rebuttal, is there anybody from the community who would like to speak based on any new information that was presented there? No. All righty. Before the public hearing is closed, commissioners, any final questions for the applicant?
No, from me.
Okie dokie. The public hearing is now closed, and at this time, the commission will deliberate. No new information may be provided and questions may be directed only to city staff during deliberations. Commissioners, what questions do we have for staff at this time? I have one, if no one else, and that was just getting at kind of what Mose was asking you. I see the notion that current single family would be allowed. That could still happen. I mean, the rezoning could have absolutely no impact if, in theory. But to Moses' question then, does this open up to a larger scale commercial development than what would currently be allowed?
It would
I mean-
allow more commercial. Let me just pull up this.
Oh, yeah, what would be some of the restrictions on that? Allowable uses.
Just go ahead and answer that.
Here we go. No, that's. Staff report, oops. Has the table with all the permitted uses for the district. So again, all of the dwellings above, commercial are allowed, hostel, multi-family, single family detached, townhouse, then commercial. Again, you'll see there's a wide range, but they all have pretty significant size limits. If it were larger than 3,000 square feet, it's conditional use permit, so they would have to go through that process. But less than 3,000 square feet, athletic club, banks, business support services. Could have a community recreation center, galleries, a small grocery or convenience store, government offices, medical offices, just professional offices, a fairly small restaurant, retail, and then just public
Okay.
and civic uses. So there are numerous commercial uses that would be allowed, but they are
Restricted in
pretty
size.
controlled on the impact they would have.
Don't know Home Depot.
No.
I know that the drawing was a concept. But if there was a concern by commissioners to make a notation or not an exception. I guess you could note it if there was
Well, I know one thing I had been thinking was, I mean, would there and city staff assist me in this, would there be a way with this and, well, city staff? Would there be a way that to say that the rezone is contingent upon a more concrete development plan accepted by city staff and or comes before us and or city council? Is that, if there is any concern, is that it might go in a different direction than what that preliminary drawing indicates?
If the commission has some specific items they would like potentially incorporated into a development agreement, you could let us know that. We could come up with some wording and bring that back to you at your next meeting. Is the concern, or is it that the desire is that it's multiple family versus single family, or that it does have a commercial component? Those are the kinds of things that we would want direction on to bring forward.
But that would come, and then after that happened is when a rezone might take place. It's not that the rezone would.
Right, then you would make your recommendation to city council based on the terms of the development agreement, and then it would be city council's decision whether they wanted to move forward with the rezone and the terms of the development agreement.
I'm concerned with the density. I mean, North Warrior is gonna be crowded. And then I'm, thinking about the train stops and I mean, how far is traffic gonna be stopped when that happens? And that's a lot of 107 units approximately. And that's a lot of cars. That's my biggest concern. And I imagine a traffic impact study will be required.
Right, yeah, it's in the process, yeah.
And that would be further down the road.
Right.
Yeah, it's definitely a concern.
Yeah, it's a big concern.
I think what I heard Amy say that we're not at the spot for recommendations. If we're
Conceptual.
approving.
I think some of the details of the recommendations we're considering would come further down the road. They'd come out when a whatever needed, if a conditional use permit is needed or whatever is needed to proceed with the final plans. That's when we would look more specifically at those conditions.
Most, were you getting ready to say something?
Yeah, I have a lot of thoughts. So I think just south of this, to the east by the tracks, we approved something that was probably not as dense as this, but portions of it specifically, I think, have close to this amount of density. Also, to the west, there is some fairly dense buildings that are 3 stories that have very difficult parking. That obviously we didn't approve because that was somebody way before us. I am personally in favor of the mixed use designation because it gives us the option to incorporate other aspects of use to property. And I'm a commercial property owner, and I can tell you that there's not enough commercial property in this county. And with the amount of growth that we have, commercial opportunities need to become more present, or there's going to be a significant problem with the amount of people that are going to live here, especially in this area. I don't know, the traffic is going to end up being an issue, but those are the growing pains that I think every growing city has. And we've talked about it with just about everything that's come up in the last several years. And I think our concerns are being heard, and I think the traffic studies, in my opinion, don't quite add up. To me, they always seem like they're a little bit light.
I think it's, excuse me, but yes, that's very true. It's like each one individually doesn't reach the threshold, but cumulatively they're way past the threshold.
Yeah, I have questions about that, but I don't, that's not up to us. I think what we're asked today is, to change from single family to mixed use. I'm not in favor of this being single family because it's in an area where more density makes a lot of sense. This amount of density, now we're not asked to approve 107 units plus commercials. So I think we're looking at that. Yeah, some hesitation. I'd want to see more details, which, you know, of course, it says we have a development agreement that has to be, you know, put together. I like that there is a little bit of a grid pattern street situation that would possibly connect a road to the west, which would be great. You know, apartments are the closest thing we have to affordable housing right now, especially in town. I know people that will live there. I wonder if they're getting kicked out. But I definitely have the concerns of I think my concern is more of that it is going to be pretty tight. Because mixed use would potentially allow that many units. It would be pretty tight. And I believe with that amount of commercial component also, it's going to be a popular place if it ended up looking like that. I guess if I had an opinion that would be heard is it's a little bit too dense, especially if those business owners wanted to have a chance. I think it'd be very congested. It might be seen as a place that was a little bit too hard to get in and out of. But other than that, I'm a big fan of mixed use. Like somebody else had mentioned, you know, you travel around the country, there's a ton of mixed use around this country, and it seems to be working pretty well. It's a nice way to get business owners to have people kind of watching their business when they're not there in the evening or on the weekend or whatever. And it you know, sometimes it doesn't really work that well, I think, but I think it depends on, you know, who's doing the project too. If it's done right, it makes a lot of sense, and I think it works well. And I appreciate the amount of thoroughness he put into the presentation too. Appreciate it. Thank you.
I'd like to piggyback on Mo. I agree with the mixed use, especially on North Boyer with all the development that's going on. I think it's a great spot for it with the sidewalk that will have to be going in for those individuals out there. I think it's a great idea. That I'm concerned as well with the density, and maybe that's something you could take back. You know, I know it's going to be in the future for us and city council to think about, but that's a lot. That is tight in there. But I do like the mixed use in that area.
I feel like the commercial side of the mixed use has been underutilized out there, and the
Yeah.
positioning for it is pretty perfect for the development across the street and the one behind it. So I do like the design.
It truly would be ideal if people could live and work and shop
Yeah.
by foot.
Or bike.
And I mean, yeah, or bike.
Mhm.
Yeah, that would be
You
an
can
ideal.
slide across the crosswalk and get a piece of pizza or a gallon of milk.
It's a great
Yeah.
neighborhood hub potential.
There's nothing between, you know, say Super One, Miller's and Schweitzer Conoco.
Just the
Yeah.
coffee cup.
Yeah.
That's it. Yeah.
So that's,
Are we ready?
I think, I'm ready to entertain a motion if somebody wants to make one,
Mr. Chairman?
please.
I move the Sandpoint Planning and Zoning Commission, after consideration of the criteria and relevant standards of the Idaho Code and Sandpoint City Code, recommend approval of the request to the City Council by Pearson Homes and Viper Rental Limited for a zone change from residential single family to mixed use residential on the properties known as 805, 815, and 915 North Boyer Avenue, and legally described as lots 1, 2, and the east 25 feet of lots 7 and 8 in block 3 of Culver's Edition, and lots 1 and 2 of Samuelson Place Plat, section 15, township 57 north, range 2 west, records of Bonner County, Idaho. The recommendation is based on the findings that 1, the proposed zone change is in conformance with the future land use map and other policies within the comprehensive plan. 2, the proposed MUR zone as submitted with conditions incorporated into a development agreement is consistent and compatible with existing zoning and future land uses in the vicinity of the site. 3, particular consideration has been given to the effects of this proposed zone change upon the delivery of services by any political subdivision providing public services within the planning jurisdiction. And 4, staff has followed the notice procedures applicable to zone changes contained in Idaho Code 67-6511 and Sandpoint City Code Title 9, Chapter 9.
I'll second.
We have a second. Any further discussion on the motion? Then we will take a roll call.
Chairman,
Yes,
for clarification, I believe finding number 2 within the parentheses, I believe that's 2 options.
Right.
Either the MUR zone as submitted is consistent or with the conditions incorporated into a development agreement. I think there are 2 options there.
As submitted.
gotcha. That's submitted.
And can we do that?
Okay.
Correction, as submitted.
Good catch. Thank you. Okay. Commissioner Boyd?
Yes.
Yes, I vote yes.
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 The motion carries unanimously. Thank you all for being here this evening.
As another point of clarification, who seconded that?
I did.
Thank you.
All righty. The next item on the agenda this evening is a review of 2 draft comprehensive plan chapters, land use growth and implementation. And I will now yield the floor to City Planner Amy Tweeten for an overview of those chapter drafts.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So the first chapter for review is that land use and growth. And the first thing, just to go over, because we had some of that discussion already this evening, was the current future land use map talks about context areas. And the updated comprehensive plan is proposing moving away from context areas and simplifying into land use categories that are maybe a little more apparent to a non-planner of, if I look at it and it says high density residential, I know what it means versus context area 4. So just trying to make it a little more
User-friendly.
easily understandable by the general public.
Question on that?
Sorry,
Question on that?
yes.
Will that give people the impression that that is the zoning for that area? Like specifically?
It may, but the land use categories will just be a description and it'll, from that, the zoning will be developed.
Good.
So you may have, for example, the land use may be single family residential. You might have 2 zoning districts in that land use category. Or high density residential, you may have more than 1 zoning category in that land use. So these don't completely line up, but the proposed land use categories are single family residential, mixed residential, high density residential, neighborhood mixed use corridor, downtown, industrial, and that actually I'm going to expand. It's going to be heavy commercial industrial. And then parks and open space, and a new category that we don't currently have is public quasi-public. And that in the current land use map, you'll see there's industrial there, or there's the context areas. What the public quasi-public land use will indicate is where do we have schools, hospitals, those institutional uses that aren't really, they're not residential, they're not commercial, they are a land use category unto themselves. So in the future land use category of single family. It's characterized by our traditional street system. We have the urban forest and alleys. There's a variety of housing types. In the single family, you could have single family detached, you could have two family attached, which are duplexes, cottage housing, and accessory dwelling units, which all of those are currently allowed in our single family zoning district. So to your point of, can people get confused? They may, but we will have zoning categories to follow up on the land use categories. The lot sizes are the traditional of what is currently in the community for single family, 4,000, 7,000 square feet. These were previously identified mostly as character area 2. And again, it's primarily a grid pattern or a modified grid or curvilinear streets pattern. The mixed residential is the broader, if you think of the current land use categories, a mixed use residential is going to be primarily the orange areas. So it will have a mix of, again, you can have single family in those areas, but there'll be a wider mix of allowed uses in terms of you could have fourplex townhomes or multifamily buildings. And again, what the zoning district will determine is how many units where. But it is a wider range of housing that is than the single family category. There'll be variable lot sizes, and this was, again, this orange CA3 area previously. And again, the same existing street pattern. The high density residential, we don't have, well, it's CA4 identified currently. This would be those larger scale multifamily developments located along collector or arterial streets. The density is 15 to 30 units at dwelling units per acre. And again, following the existing street pattern. Neighborhood mixed use serves as a buffer between residential neighborhoods and commercial areas. It doesn't have a set density because you may have mixed use buildings in that district. And this was that area we just discussed of CA3B primarily is where these areas would be. And again, following the same existing street pattern. The mixed use corridor is intended as more of the heavier commercial, so that would be along the arterial streets of Highway 2, North Boyer, North Division. So it'd be it would be more of an auto-oriented type development than maybe a mixed use or the neighborhood mixed use. And it covers both character area 4 and 5 in the current designations. And then parks and open space, those will be identified whether they are publicly or privately owned for recreation or environmental protection purposes. Again, the public, quasi-public is government offices, facilities, schools, hospitals, churches, cemeteries, just those facilities that don't easily fit into other land use categories and primarily are tax exempt.
Would those all be existing uses as opposed to designating a new area as a public cause?
Well-
It would be what's already being used in that fashion.
And then the downtown land use will be the historic downtown. Again, the pedestrian orientation, waterfront, and mix of uses and a higher density allowed. And for that higher density, likely those upper story setbacks, but that would be something determined in the actual zoning code. And then the heavy commercial, industrial areas would support the airport offices, manufacturing. Those will be very similar to the current industrial areas where we have them. And a lot of this area is within that airport overlay zone. So I wanted to go through those those changes with you first, and then, given we had the public hearing tonight, what we will do at our meeting on the 31st is kind of start working through the map and how these character areas become these new land use designations, where there are changes and where there may be further discussion needed on, is an area truly part of, is it a mixed use corridor, or is it a neighborhood corridor? What's the appropriate land use for that?
Question before you move, maybe a couple questions before you move on. Go ahead.
So the area of city impact, I don't see a designation for that that's proposed. Is that the low density clustered residential, or is that? Oh,
Yeah,
what's it gonna be called?
we haven't identified yet what the land use categories in the ACI are gonna be. What we're doing right now is working on what is that boundary going to be. From a staff level, we know we want it to be where we can feasibly serve utilities within the next 20 years. So the current ACI, as you'll see on this map, is very large. It includes this whole blue area and green area. So what we're doing is, and this will also be a discussion on the 31st, is what is anticipated outer boundary of that, and then what are the land use categories that go into that, because some of those may be different. I mean, we'll have land use categories that are appropriate in the ACI that are not appropriate within the city limits. But as you asked on that, again, just the ACI being those areas that potentially the city could annex. And what we're trying to do is coordinate it, designate the ACI as the first step, and then reach agreement with the county and come back and do a full sub area plan that looks much more in depth at land use, transportation corridors. Where would you want parks and open space? Really trying to come up with a plan for that area.
So would that be, I mean, potentially the low density clustered residential?
That would definitely be one of the land use categories in that. Yeah.
Okay.
I think right now we have a rural resident, we have 2 rural residential zoning districts. And likely those would remain.
Would you go back to that slide that had the current designations, proposed designations? Because my question for you is, which of those proposed designations would allow the kind of mixed use that we were just approving this evening?
Neighborhood mixed use.
Neighborhood mixed use, not high density residential.
Sorry,
Not like high density residential would not allow for commercial retail.
right. High density residential will be where you have so up north of Woodland where Samuelson. So it's a strictly multifamily, 2 to 3 story structures, and it's strictly residential uses. Whereas both the mixed use corridor and neighborhood mixed use could have a mix of residential and commercial uses. But just, for example, if you think of Milltown, the building that received the CUP last year, that fronted Boyer,
Yes.
that's required to have the ground floor commercial. Those units behind that exist, those were also required to have ground floor non-residential uses. But if you go past there, there's no commercial activity going on. So do we need to look at areas like that? Along Boyer, maybe commercial ground level makes sense. Maybe other places, keeping it residential makes more sense. Just having a strictly residential structure instead of all multifamily buildings being required to have ground floor commercial.
I like the idea of trying to have more neighborhood orientation where there can be work, play, shopping where they live. So if there's more of those that makes sense for, it'd be something to look at. Yes.
Single family residential with ADU. So to me, it doesn't quite make sense, and I wonder if, because it then becomes potentially multifamily unless you have family of your own living in it. So does the city ever anticipate a challenge on that? Or should there be language, maybe a density exemption on a single family residential zone or description?
Well, again, what we're talking now are just the land use
Right.
designations, and if in our land use designations, we contemplate you could have an ADU in a single family land use category. But we actually also currently in our single family zoning, which is the regulations,
Mhm.
we do allow ADUs,
Right,
right?
and that's the question, because then it's multifamily.
It's two detached. I mean, you could have two single families living separately on one parcel.
So
And they're
that language
severely-
is in there. I just overlooked it.
Yeah, it's a permitted use in the
Okay.
RS zoning district.
And they're severely limited in square footage, the
Right.
ADUs,
Right,
as
yeah.
opposed to two single family homes.
All I
And
wanted to
bedrooms.
hear was that there was some language. I just have to go
Okay.
back to it and
Gotcha.
review it.
Okay,
And limited to one bedroom.
at this point.
Yeah,
this
it's
point,
intended to be accessory.
Yeah.
So, but I mean, you probably could run into a situation where you have a very small house on a lot currently. And they build that's less than 900 square feet, and they build an ADU that's 900 square feet. So, is it?
Or they
accessory
could
at
build
that
a
point?
1,500
Yeah.
square feet and count,
Sorry,
or they could build a 1,500 square feet and count that as an ADU. Right?
Not the 15,
Well, no, if it's less than 900 square foot home already on.
the
the
other
property.
one, the hypothetical
Right,
existing one,
right.
okay.
The
Right,
existing home.
right, they could
yes,
call the
yes,
small house.
Right.
interesting
ADU,
point.
yeah,
Yeah,
Interesting.
Right.
that's what I would do.
And there may be a few of those around.
I'm sure there is.
Yeah.
Okay,
Also looking at those being the 4,000 to 7,000 square feet available lot size too, which in the multifamily or the higher density areas, your lot size would need to be at least that big to have so many more dwelling units.
Right.
So the 4,000 is 4,000 like a proposed now, or is 4,000 what we're at right now because there are small non-conforming?
our minimum currently is 5,000.
Yeah, but there are 4,000s, right? Well, actually, I actually saw
Not
one,
a lot, but
that was like 1,900 somewhere that was for sale recently, which kind of surprised me.
but that is by having this in the land use category saying lot sizes could be that big. I would anticipate moving forward when we are talking ordinance updates. Do we want to revisit our minimum lot size? So, yes, it is intentional that it's in there at
Yeah.
4,000 versus 5,000.
Yeah, I wondered, and that would affect our future subdivision applications. Which would, yeah,
In the event that the commission and council determined 4,000 square feet could be the minimum lot size, yeah, future subdivisions likely would start coming forward with smaller lot sizes.
I have a question on the mixed residential.
Mhm.
Would that be? Maybe my question won't make sense, but we don't really have a lot size, or it says the lot size variable. Would it kind of mirror that same single family, only you would get the possibility of more dense?
Right, it could, again, it could be looking at townhomes and changing our townhome regulations for the minimum lot size you have for a townhome. So the lot sizes could actually be smaller even than within the single family residential land use category.
Am I wrong? But is this, the mixed residential is kind of a, we don't really have that right now.
We don't have a land use category. What the mixed residential is what I would consider the majority of what we currently have zoned mixed or multifamily residential.
Which allows up to fourplexes. Currently, isn't that?
Currently it depends on your lot size. There's the,
Right,
up
right.
to 7 you're permitted use. And then beyond that, you're a conditional use, but
Gotcha.
if you have enough lot area,
Yep.
Would the cottage development thing fit under that?
it could come under that, or it could come under single family. Currently, we allow cottage housing in the single family districts and the multiple family districts. Zoning districts, sorry.
Okay.
Do you ever envision a time when Sandpoint would allow quote unquote tiny houses? Where they are more mobile, where they still need to be connected to city sewer and water and electrical and such, but they are not anchored to the ground.
Is your question, do we allow that?
We don't allow that
We
now.
don't allow them.
Do you ever envision a time where that might be desirable to allow that?
I think it'd be difficult with the building code.
You know, I know that there was one that, I don't know, the permit, they were putting in what was being called a tiny home development in Ponderay. Do you know if that? It's been sitting with the services put in, but there are no tiny homes there.
I have to say, I'm not familiar
Okay.
with that, sorry.
Gotcha.
Chairman, would you be taking any public comment on this workshop tonight?
Can we?
I'm in favor of, but go ahead, legal.
I don't think that this is the appropriate forum.
Okay.
I apologize. 'Cause I'm
No, no, that's okay. Right. Oh, so now he leaves. But to your point, I would like to see that incorporated into all of our meetings, that there is a time for public input. Because at this point, there's not. But at any rate,
So a question on, on one of the previous meetings, we kind of barely spoke about the footprint, the allowable percentage per lot. If our lot sizes potentially go down on the single family or even in all of them, are we looking at that percentage going up? As far as,
Likely you would.
okay. Because I'm just, my opinion on, one of my opinions, I have many, about our housing, affordability, and availability really is the big thing. It's such a big, broad thing that we are only a very small part of. But I believe if there was the ability for, I don't know about tiny houses. I mean, people have opinions about those, but like right now, if you have a single family lot, you're almost required to build as big as you can and as nice as you can to try to capitalize, to make, if you're building it to sell, and most of the houses that are built right now are built by developers and they're sold. It kind of makes it to where the affordability is just never going to be an option in there. Because by the time they go through all the work to make it happen, there's a ton of money invested, and with the impact fees and, connection fees to city utilities, and it's like it's never going to be affordable because of the they're almost boxed into exactly how big it needs to be, and then therefore the cost. And I think, and I've done a lot of research on the tiny house market too, and they're almost in the same category of a really small house that a family can't live in, but it costs per square foot is more because of the impacts and so, yeah, is there a different zone where it's almost like RVs or campers or something are allowed because really they make more sense because they can be moved. So does the city allow RV parks or anything like that currently to be connected?
We have municipally owned one.
Well, could I piggyback on that
Yeah,
too?
we only allow them where they are legally in a mobile home park.
Okay, I was gonna say, because we currently have mobile home parks.
Yeah.
And is that what they are zoned as?
Sorry,
Are they
See,
zoned as a mobile home park? I mean, that, haven't seen that anywhere, but,
they're in a park.
right.
and they're like, they were done like
They're in
4 million
CUP
years
park.
ago.
If somebody wanted to put in a new mobile home park in Sandpoint, could
Be
they?
a CUP, wouldn't it?
I don't know that you could do it through a PUD because you have to be allowed to do it by the underlining zoning.
I'm just curious.
So I guess it's a discussion.
Or if they're
for-
kind of grandfathered in, the
Something
ones that we
update,
have,
yeah.
yes.
So
Okay.
in my travels, a lot of cities have like city type RV parks where there's not a lot of grass or, outdoors, it's a city, it's a parking lot essentially, but it has connections to the city services. I just bring it up because it's much easier to fit a lot of units in a small space and when that's the option. As soon as you get out of city service area like sewer and water, becomes really hard for somebody to put an RV park in because you just can't get enough septic. And so a developer may look at that as being an option that, the build would be a lot faster. And the city would get all those connection fees, right?
Should add something in the ACR.
Well, I know we have those,
Fairgrounds are expanding their campground.
Yeah.
and Pondere has a couple.
Mhm.
They're year-round residential RV parks. Those aren't come and goes. They're people live
Yeah.
there year-round. At any rate,
Anyway, yeah.
Well, it's an interesting conversation.
It
I've
is.
never been a huge tiny house guy because they're so one-dimensional. I've always
limited market.
thought that, like a 600 square foot place would be interim suitable for somebody, on the move or on a wait list to go somewhere else. But, that's a different kind of development and it's a different concept that somebody would have to, take on the challenge of doing it and want to actually run and manage it because
Right.
it's short-term rental probably.
Well, and a developer isn't gonna put out that kind of money for very low return or
Yeah.
potentially never get your money back.
And because that reminds me, one thing, there is some language, minimal language in here when I was looking over this earlier. But to the point of affordability and the developer trying to maximize, and that will always be the case. And I know it was mentioned in here that the city needed to look at partnerships. I mean, the only way that there'll be affordable housing is in public and private partnerships. The private will not do it on its own, generally speaking. It's a rarity. And I know that there's a housing authority that's being explored. And I think that's where the answers to affordability will come.
Yeah, one of my concerns with that is that if you have an affordable component somehow that's enforced, it's almost like it has to be enforced forever. Because after the first person buys it, what's stopping them from just selling it at a profit or market value? And if it has some sort of deeded.
There is,
component,
they usually do have that.
But then who wants to buy it? Because once you buy something, part of owning property is having value as an
But
asset.
there's a sunset on those. There's a sunset on those. If I want to buy it and stay in it for 2 years, then I'm not going to be able to sell it for market value. But if I stay in it for 20, by that point, it's gone. I get whatever the market bears. But so they usually are sunsetted when they have those, but we might be off topic.
Put us back.
A little bit.
Affordable housing, it can just go on and on, yeah.
We got a whole nother chapter we got to get to. Come on.
We haven't had a long meeting in a while. Haven't had a long meeting since last year.
So back to the question on the land uses and that ACI predominantly will be residential. But at densities that can support the extension of utilities, because if the lots are too big, it's never gonna be viable to get utilities to those areas. And then potentially some small mixed use areas or small commercial areas will also be considered. So just back to the general question, because I mean, the land use categories can certainly be tweaked, but does it make some sense going, do the proposed categories make sense?
I believe they do. And then,
Yes.
of course, the nuts and bolts is when you get down to the little graphs, what's allowed, what's not allowed in each of those, you know, but yes, I think these titles make much more sense to everybody.
And these proposed are not changing any of the areas that are currently, they're just, the name is being changed, right?
There may be some, I mean, it won't, the future land use map won't look exactly like this. There'll be some tweaks. And yeah,
And those would be like.
Will we see those?
Notable.
yeah, and so that's what I just wanted to get through kind of the categories.
Yeah.
So our meeting on the 31st will be very focused on
Specific.
the mapping of these areas. Okay. Okay, then I'll just read through the goals quickly. I'm not gonna go through all the objectives. But the land use future growth has a number of goals: efficient land use. Sandpoint's mature and developed areas are invested in and enhanced, reducing pressure to expand into the area of city impact to accommodate population growth. Although we do know with the Leland report, we are running out of areas to increase. So the ACI becomes that much more important. Residential neighborhoods, diversity, quality, comfort, and connectivity of Sandpoint's residential neighborhoods is expanded. So looking into future areas, making sure that which people value about their neighborhoods continues to be available. Mixed use development that provide the benefits of more compact, denser neighborhoods with a mix of living, shopping, and working environments close to services are encouraged and supported. And there you did it tonight. Quality places, dynamic, attractive, and desirable places to live and operate businesses are fostered and developed. This kind of gets at the community character goals and objectives in, I think it's chapter 1. Again, the area of city impact development, location, infrastructure, and character of development in the ACI is coordinated. Making sure that we can extend utilities and provide services. Location, infrastructure. Oh, this is just continued objectives of the ACI. So that is the draft of chapter 4. And like I said, for the 31st, we'll be getting more into details of the land use categories and the map itself. So, sorry.
A couple comments when I was looking through some of that earlier, and one, it was on page 7 of chapter 4. If you can find, or do what we have, what we were given, is that different when you were just going through? It kind of looked like maybe it was, but I don't know. totally the wrong spot, right? At any rate, I can just tell you what my concern was. There was a statement in there about preserving urban canopy. I personally, I would like to see that verbiage stronger, that it would be expand urban canopy. If we want to keep our community, if we want to keep our air clean and our climate cool, we want to expand that canopy as much as possible.
Was that one of the objectives? on that
Yes,
list?
yeah, I was,
Okay.
yeah. It was just tucked in there about maintaining urban canopy, but I think we have an opportunity to expand it. And
On B, not, well, B is under goal 4, educate community on value of the urban forest.
all I put was page 7, urban canopy. You can make a note. And see if you- Oh, maybe that educate. Oh, yeah, maybe that.
Places.
Yeah. Are you finding it? Because I'm not.
Yeah,
right there.
it's under quality places.
That educate the community on the value of urban forests, but there was something I thought that specifically mentioned canopy. But maybe not. But I would think that would. And maybe that's where I was thinking of putting it, and to work to expand the urban canopy.
I think that was the only place.
Maybe, yeah.
I think we'll probably have that multiple places.
Gotcha.
Um, Okay. Let's see, was there something else, John? You said there were 2 things?
There was, and I don't know exactly where the other one would come into play, but some of, I mean, there's been several points in here where it's talked about parks and the reality of within, it specifically says within the city limits, and the opportunity for Sandpoint to purchase land to develop a park within the city limits is probably not possible at this juncture. There's no significant land, and or the expense would be too great. So wherever that was, and maybe it's here, but I would like to see that expanded and legal. Tell me on this. As it currently stands, is it legal for the city of Sandpoint to purchase land outside of city limits for the purpose of a park?
So long as it was incorporated into the city, then yes. it
And
could be.
So specifically, we could say, at least one thing it could say is that instead of saying within city limits, we could say within city limits or the ACI.
Right.
So that, because that it's not city, but we hope that it will be. But the only way we'll ever get more parkland if it is outside of what is currently Sandpoint.
I was thinking we should start selling these parks and so nobody's using them.
Oh, we already seen the parks.
Just look on the other
You're
side.
in current talks with the county about acquiring some of our ACI, or do you know of, or,
Talks with the county about.
yeah, about, our ACI,
Are they amenable to the whole idea? You know, I mean,
about,
Well, there were high level discussions.
Huh?
We have a
and
friend there.
I'm going to be meeting with the planning director. To kind of get, because I think the discussions were when there was a previous planning director, and I don't know how much of that made its way to the current. So I'll be talking to him, and the process will likely be, council will be asking the commission to to work with staff, come up with the ultimate boundary, and then make their recommendation back to council, who will then negotiate that with the county.
okay.
Yeah, but getting those. Like I said, I don't know how much the current planning director has been involved in those discussions. Probably knows that we're looking at downsizing, but what that actually means. In addition to just changing our boundaries is something we're gonna need to discuss.
I think part of that is the discussion we had before. I remember a lot of that ACI area is like vertical.
Right.
It's so
Mountainous.
no need for that to be in the ACI because it's not that happen.
Like Baldy Mountain is in there.
When's the last time we've done that?
When was the last time that ACI was updated?
That we, that we
That we
annexed that.
expanded.
Oh,
Or annexed?
I was in high school.
when was the last annexation? May have been, I don't know if it was Baldy property. Or it was that subdivision, the Goodman subdivision, potentially. Those are the two. Let's see, what map do I have that I could show you?
I don't know. Not while I've been here.
Maybe on this. Oh, up.
In the
Okay,
nineties, it was.
so this is that
all the time.
Goodman subdivision, this is Woodland. And there's this subdivision
Hmm.
to the west of the
Oh,
tracks.
okay.
Or the Baldy property. My guess is those were the most recent, but what years those occurred, I do not know.
Very interesting.
Okay.
Let's see.
I think Ontario South was a big deal for a while.
To the water? No,
Can't remember exactly, but Dover
to Dover, to
Dover had
the
a,
highway.
Dover had a big problem with it. Is before Dover was even had very many people. It was Old Town, old part of Dover. And I think it. I think it got-
Okay, then implementation, talks about once you get your plan adopted, what's the management of it? When do you make amendments to the plan? What are the processes? So there are text amendments or land use amendments, and then that major update, that's what we are doing currently. And just the criteria for amending the future land use map.
Are we deciding that tonight?
No, this is just
Draft.
kind of the process of you adopt your plan and how do you then, we've had these discussions of, we have all these lofty goals and objectives, what does it actually mean? This is more just updating the plan itself. But then through your development reviews is how you're actually implementing that plan. So when someone comes to you with a rezone or someone comes to you with a CUP, you're making sure that that request is consistent with the comprehensive plan that you have adopted. And these are all the, and what I included in the packet was a page from the current plan of how this is laid out. So we've got like a goal and objective. So how do you accomplish that? You're gonna update your zoning code to address, for example, accessory dwelling units. Do we want to increase the size or do we not want to increase the size? What are the subdivision regulations? Do you need to do sub area plans? So the implementation part of the plan will have all kinds of implementation tools to implement all those broad goals and objectives. And these are just examples of what all those. So it's kind of going through the plan chapters currently and pulling out every time it says, consider updating the code, and then actually putting that into the table, update the code. What's the timeline? Who's involved? So that's your actual implementation table as part of this chapter.
Have you been doing that simultaneously with this current or updating of the comp plan?
Since we've been getting farther into the chapters, I've been starting to pull those out.
Ah.
So that it's, by category, what are the implementation? There's a lot of, and I know we had this discussion as well, there's a lot of cross goals, like even the urban forestry, that probably comes up in 4 or 5 of the chapters, but it is important. And so we have to make sure the goals are there, but then we need that implementation in the actual action part of the plan. So that's the implementation. The draft of the implementation chapter, just kind of talking through what's the process. And as I get farther on doing that actual implementation table, that will get incorporated as well, and that'll come forward to you.
And on the draft, that was one of the other things here. Now I remember that's where I had seen the thing too about the urban canopy, I believe, but in the implementation table, I don't want to sound like I'm single focus here. But you know, where it says who's supposed to do it and what's its priority. The park thing was lowest priority.
3+.
I would rather see that. I don't know how much difference it would make, but I would rather see that bumped up. I mean, we're going to lose the opportunity to ever have any more parkland if we don't act on it quickly, because the cost of real estate is going to become prohibitive. So instead of having that one of the lower priorities, I would rather see it a higher priority. I don't know how much weight that would sort of carry on that if it says it's a number 1 or a 2 on that chart instead of a number 3, but I think,
That chart from the current plan, you're saying.
or it was
In the
something in the package you had sent earlier, yeah. Yeah,
So after all of this is said and done and council approves this updated comp plan, then we can go into the zoning code changes. Is that the next step?
Right.
Step after this? Okay.
It'll be numerous codes that are, zoning will be number 1.
Okay.
Zoning and subdivision will be probably a little bit easier. But then there's you know, there are development codes, there's
So are you-
there's a lot.
So is staff doing that as well simultaneously with this process?
Sorry, we what?
Going through zone or finding the inconsistencies with the zone? Or are you guys gonna be I guess adding more afterwards, more work? Or are you guys doing
Well,
that now?
Well, what we'll need to do is make sure if there's changes that need to happen to the zoning map. And where, I mean, there's the regulations and then that's where those regulations apply. So it'll be. That'll all be coming through the planning
Right,
commission.
right.
All of, yeah, we'll be going chapter by chapter. Through the zoning code.
A lot of late
So
hours. for you, Amy.
you analyze it for revision.
And some of it is organization, you know, is it easy to find what you're looking for, or is it somewhere you wouldn't expect to look for it? So just making sure it's an easy to read and find code as well.
okay. Do you have anything else for us?
You're gonna be busy.
No, but so on the 31st, we will be talking about land use ACI and potentially implementation again.
We're on track, right?
We are on track. We lost about a month
Mhm.
in December, but we're on pretty good track.
Kind of curious about our involvement in capital projects and investments. I don't know if that's us or not.
Not.
You can say no.
I mean, it is in terms of. Through the comp plan and implementation, you're setting priorities. And so those then get pulled into, okay, so the comp plan says this is a priority. How do we take that and make it into a capital project? So, for example, we know sidewalks.
Mhm.
So there is the, you know, a plan of where are the sidewalks? Where do they make sense? Where are the links? And then getting the funding to get those projects constructed. So it all starts with a comprehensive plan. It sets the direction for all of these things,
20 years.
Can't wait.
20 years, but update it in 5 or 10.
So I'd like to come around to that point that I made up and y'all tell me the way that we proceed. You know, when we look at this, they're bringing us the revisions and we are revising that. And then at some point we get a final product and we'll approve it. And then it will go to city council. And that's the first time the public gets to say anything. And I would like to see at most of these meetings where we're getting input. I mean, sometimes there's public here, sometimes there's not, but I think it would be really a nice thing in terms of open government to, at the end of these kinds of presentations, does the public have anything they would like to add to the deliberations we've just had? And I don't know how we would proceed to make that a part. Is that
Well,
something?
the surveys are part of that,
Yeah,
correct? I mean, public input, I know it's a small,
it's a small part of it and yeah.
that does
Well,
give,
and mostly the public surveys have gone into what city staff has already brought us. Yeah, I don't know. I'm just thinking that.
no, I agree. I think it would be nice. If, I mean, it just gives them the opportunity to say, well, we have a full room, highly doubtful.
We have sometimes, not today.
But if we have one or two that have expresses an
I think that's the desired outcome of a workshop for citizens.
right?
It is.
Right, and we will do a workshop before we do our hearing on the final document, but your point is just as we are incrementally going along.
Would there not
where's
be
the-
public input earlier in the process?
Well, we do know all the information is posted.
That's true.
There is actually, if you're at all interested, if you go to the city, all of the chapters that you have reviewed are on the website, under master plans, and it's comprehensive plan update. So all the chapters that you've reviewed, are there.
You know, I remember in probably mid-22 when we had a guest speaker here and they were showing us some survey results that there was more activity from outside city limits than inside.
Yeah.
Remember that?
Yeah.
Always. Always. Everybody from outside the city wants to vote in the city. Well, I think,
Well,
John, to your point, though, I think that's what our role is. We're the public. You know, I mean, we're not exactly city employees, so
we're not
Um,
elected yet.
we're brought here to have our community presence, you know, as a vote or a say. And but I agree. I mean, some input would be pretty cool. And I noticed that the survey we got when I logged into it, there was only like 12 people had taken it so far, which was a couple of days in at least, I think. So
Mm.
hopefully it's quite a bit more than that.
Today, and I think we're up to. Were we up to 200 or were we still below 200? So no, not,
Not,
and I mean, that's,
You'd have to be pretty intentional about discovery. You'd have to log into the city website to see it. It's not advertised anywhere, right?
it's been
well,
emailed
in
out.
Paper, it's been on
With
Facebook.
email, yeah.
It's been emailed out to like.
I think
the-
200 is about the paper circulation.
That's usually about the norm. I mean, that's a good number considering 200. I think in the past that it's been,
I think.
Yeah, I mean, that's not
lower.
what we get when we do a survey on dog parks.
right.
Then we get like 800 people. But,
Email the voters.
housing in neighborhoods is a little harder to get, even though everyone knows there's a housing crisis. It's a little harder to get people thinking
Yeah.
proactively about it than whether they want basketball or a dog park or tennis court, so.
Pickleball. Pickleball now.
Yeah, right. It's huge.
But is there any way, back to John's question, is there any way that we can implement that into our meetings, or is that against?
So similar
Precedent?
to a city council where they say, there's a public
They do,
forum,
yeah.
period.
Prior to the
Um,
meeting, right?
Which the public forum typically is people talking on something not on the agenda. So, I'll talk to Fonda about the best way. I think the intent is, once you open up to the public, you can start going off this. I mean, this
Right,
is
right.
really.
It needs to
your
stay
time
focused. Yeah.
to get this, review the
Yeah.
document, get your questions answered.
Because there is, the public does have an opportunity to talk about,
They do.
you know, our agenda or development or whatever that comes up during the meeting.
What Facebook is for.
Right.
Oh, well.
Yes, I mean, do we want that? Do, you know?
I'm
I don't know.
happy to chime in here as well.
Yes, please.
Yeah.
I
Facebook
don't-
isn't for you.
In a situation like this, I think it's very important that planner Tweeten just present the information without sort of outside influences, which can be very deleterious at times.
Right.
I think tonight would not have been at all. I think tonight would have been very insightful, but that's a very unique situation. I think the public workshop is the public's current opportunity to do that. But I don't think there's anything stopping the city from reevaluating the way that they structure these hearings and meetings and allow for public comment if the commission and frankly, the city council wanted that.
Mhm.
I think that we could structure that, but it would just take changes in the process.
Maybe instead of 3 minutes, give them 30 seconds.
I don't know.
I was very impressed with Dr. Kubert, her saying a lot.
Right on the money.
Pro. man.
She was afraid of the hook. There's the little shock buzzer. All right,
All right, we good?
are we good?
Here's your long
Commissioners,
meeting, Mo.
Have any more questions for staff or anybody else?
It's your long meeting.
Thanks. Well, you missed one. right?
We will adjourn the formal part of the meeting, but those of you who want to stick around to hear a few more of Moses' opinions.
Be here all night.
Sarah's like, I'm not waiting for him.
Meeting adjourned.
Meeting is adjourned.